Welcome to the What's Your Deal podcast, where we discuss business acquisitions, investments, management, and exit strategies. I'm your host, Matt Euler. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of What's Your Deal podcast. Today, we're joined again with Coach John Potenza. And if you missed part 1 and part 2, I highly recommend you go back and listen to those episodes first, because we had in-depth conversations about the similarities between combat sports and business. Now, Coach John has a resume that comes about 4 pages long, but just to kind of recite some of what I shared previously, he's been training in the combat sports industry for over 45 years. He participated and competed for an enormous number of those years and is proficient, and in some cases holds black belts in up to 16 different styles. He's been a world champion. He's been inducted into the Martial Arts Hall of Fame 10 times, a career that's just like none other. And so I'm honored to have him back again. Part of the reason I asked him to join us is because, metaphorically speaking, when you take skill sets from one industry and apply them to another, in this case, combat sports to business, it's amazing how much you can learn and apply to the industry that you're pursuing. So I'm super grateful to have John back and looking forward to today's episode. So in part 1 and part 2, we talked about several aspects of combat sports that apply to business. Number 1, how do you take a hit? Because in combat sports, of course, you're going to, but in business, there are things that come up every day that will come out of nowhere and surprise you, and it's important to know how to deal with those. How do you manage your emotions when you're in the middle of a situation that's in business? Oftentimes you have time and you can take your time working through those. In combat sports, it is a huge magnifier of how to have to deal with those emotions in that environment. We talked about the power of team and coaching and mentorship, how important that is in combat sports, really crucial, but also, in my opinion, equally as crucial in business. And lastly, we talked about how to carry yourself with honor and integrity in everything you do, whether it's combat sports or business. So with that, let's move on to John. Thanks again for joining us, John.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we were going to talk about today is the event. And what I mean by the event in your world is you've got somebody who's ready to compete. And for many years, that was you. Now I know you coach people where they're getting ready for this event. When I think about that in my world, in business, it might be a super important meeting. It might be something that's really a meeting with a customer, a meeting with a partner, the IRS, right? There's lots of things that come up in business that can bring similarities to what somebody might go through when they're getting ready for an event like you participate in. So can you walk us through a little bit some of what you do to help people get prepared for an event in a fight? And I'm going to try to extract some of that, and we're really going to break it down so that it's as transferable as possible for people to benefit from using it in their business.
Gotcha. Yeah. So the way we go through it, we start from the very beginning of just getting the basic structure together, right? So we always have to have our basic foundation, our structure of everything from conditioning to timing to footwork to hand placement to all your basic fundamentals. Mm-hmm. And then from our fundamentals, and we start putting together our balance plan, right? So we start putting together how we're going to move, what are we going to do? We start building this whole program together of strategizing from what our strong points are, what our weak points are. What do we build on to make our strong points better? What do we build on to make our weak points better? And then we put a whole plan together moving forward. And then we start getting further closer to the event. We find who our opponent's going to be. Now we start strategizing against that opponent. What are their strong points? What are their weak points? How do we exploit those things? Then we start to put our strategy together for that. So everything kind of builds upon from foundation all the way up to the mental preparation going in. And that's the final stages now when you get ready for the event, for the big fight. Now the mental roller coaster starts. It becomes this adrenaline rush. You're super excited, then you're super terrified, then you're nervous as could be, then you're super excited and happy. And there's this roller coaster of emotions you go through preparing for this fight. And as a coach, it's my job to try to manage that and minimize the stress and chaos part and maximize the excitement part.
Yeah, and so what's interesting about that, I avoid business relationships that are that are confrontational and that it's not fun and don't like it.
Right.
So again, I know we're talking about combat sports because it's such a huge magnifier of all things. So in a combat sport, of course, that person's trying to hurt you and you're trying to hurt them to win. But what I like about what you're sharing is that even in business, for me, most often that mental fight is in my head.
Yeah.
I don't actually have somebody on the other side that's trying to hurt me.
Right.
We're just trying to get an outcome that's equally beneficial. But what goes on in the mind is such a challenge. And that's also part of what I think is so fascinating about you. You talked about maintaining focus. And I know you're working with a young lady right now who's prepared to compete in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
And so everything you just described, I've watched a little bit and heard you explain. So maybe you can talk through, what's some of what she's struggling with, without names, of course. But what's it look like? And I'm assuming it's pretty similar for everybody.
Yeah, it for the most part it is. It does some things vary in some aspects. Just on a side note of that conversation is, I had a conversation this morning with another student. We were talking about mindset and fighters, and it's amazing how some people, you can get like an excellent, like a superstar in the gym, a guy who's an amazing fighter in the gym, and you put him in front of the big stage, you get him in front of the crowd and the lights and everything else, and he freezes and chokes, and that happens over and over again. That guy's, we call him a gym fighter. He's a gym fighter. He's great in the gym, but he can't take the pressure and the lights. We have other fighters who are average to mediocre in the gym, but you put him on that big stage and put the lights on and the crowd behind him, and all of a sudden that guy's a superstar.
Wow.
It's kind of interesting how different people react to that pressure environment differently, and like right now what we're going through with my young lady that's ready to getting ready to fight is dealing with that, preparing her for that, and try to say, all right, look, this is what it's going to be like when you have a whole audience. There's lights, there's cameras, there's people cheering you, there's people booing you, there's people all over the place. So you have to emotionally prepare for that, and it's an interesting roller coaster trying to deal with all those emotions and process all that at one time while you're preparing to do combat.
And this is her first.
This is her first fight.
Yeah.
So it's a lot to deal with. The first fight is always difficult because there's so much to digest.
That's, again, part of what I love so much about us, our dialogue here, is that as you talk, I hear things like that whole level of preparation to be prepared for the environment is something that is back to the preparation and visualization, like we talked about in part 1 and part 2, just getting ready for what's coming. So that's amazing.
It's pretty amazing. It's a cool roller coaster to watch it happen and be part of it. And when you're the person that's going into the ring, it's a wild thing to experience. It's just like I said, it's a roller coaster. It's pretty amazing.
So most people avoid stress.
Yeah.
In a combat sport, the stress is just inherent. What is the excitement about?
It's the challenge. It's the test of not only knowing where your own skill set is and what you're capable of, but seeing where you fall short, see where your weaknesses are, to see how you can get better, and kind of knowing that there's this when you make a mistake, it's going to hurt. Like we've talked about in the earlier episodes, every time you make a mistake, it hurts. So you have to learn quickly from everything you do. You have to adjust on the fly so fast. So it's something super exciting about that, knowing that, all right, this is real. There's real consequences, and we have to be on the fly thinking quick. So it makes a big draw for it.
Well, and I know we covered that in a previous episode too, but that's a similarity. Why do people fight? Well, there's for money, and there's for fame, and then there's for the challenge and all of that.
Right.
And I think it's similar for business, right?
Sure.
And there are times when I'm in a challenge in business, I'm not loving life.
Right.
But I can tell you that when I get to the other side of that challenge, I am a better person, I'm a stronger person, and I'm a more capable business person because I got to the other side. And I think there's a similarity there.
Definitely. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we talked about base hits and as opposed to home runs. And for me, matter of fact, we just had a masterclass the other night, and there was one of the participants in the masterclass was brand new to owning a business and was attempting to purchase a $3.9 million car wash while having 2 full-time jobs. Well, let's call it 1 full-time between 2 careers. For me, that's swinging for the fences, right? And honestly, it makes me nervous because I can appreciate if that does not go perfectly, how painful that can be.
Sure.
So base hits would be much more baby steps, right? Maybe potentially buying a business that's small or starting a business that's small and growing in confidence and experience. Same applies with combat sports.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have to choose our fights wisely, especially in the beginning, the earlier stages. everybody wants to be a professional. People want to get in the fight. I'm a fighter now. I want to fight pro. I want to be on a big stage. I want to get paid, which is a big thing. I want to get paid to fight because this stuff's expensive. Your training's expensive. Your medicals and all physicals that go with it. They're all expensive. And so everybody wants to jump into the pro arena, but we have to choose our fights wisely and say, all right, let's take small fights on small shows that we know are manageable. Even we don't want walkover fights. We don't want an easy, but we want an even challenge and work our way up. And then once we get comfortable, we win a bunch of amateur fights and get a whole bunch. Then we go pro at a low line pro. And then we start working our way up. So same kind of thing. We've had fighters over the years come into my gym that went pro before they even came to my gym. And anybody can go pro if somebody will sign off on them. And they went to some guy's gym and the guy signed off on them and they went pro. Never had an amateur fight. And that particular guy lost every fight he ever had. I was like, dude, you can't just dive in the deep end of the pool like that. I appreciate the enthusiasm, but you're playing a dangerous game here. You're stepping into the pro arena where guys have been training 5, 10, 15 years, and you're jumping in after 6 months of training just because you think you're tough. It's terrible. It's a terrible choice. So yeah, I'm all about the small base hits first. Then once we get to a certain level, then you can swing for the fences and go, title shots and big fights. But yeah, you need those small steps.
Well, then you've got the confidence and you know who you are and you know what you're capable of and all of those things. Yeah. Embracing risk, as you're talking about this, I think there's an element, I know in business for sure, that when somebody's younger, they've got more time to recover. I mean, they can afford some more lessons. I know in the combat sport world as well, I mean, younger fighters have much more time to recover. They've got much more time to learn, all of that. So there's an element there that comes with how much risk to take and not. I'm assuming you're still really careful anyway, even if it's somebody younger. I mean,
you have to be, because those first fights are going to set the whole pace for what your career is going to look like.
Okay.
There's two schools of thought on that. Is in the amateur world for fighting, once you go pro, your amateur record no longer matters. Which is true too, that's the truth. But the other side of that coin, though, is how your amateur career formed up determines where you fall in the pro line. So if you went 10-0 as an amateur, you beat everybody, you're going to be able to go into one of the bigger shows fast, and you'll be able to push into a higher level. If you've gone 0-10 and you lost every fight, then you go pro. Not a lot of pro shows are going to look to sign you, and when they do sign you, you're going to garbage pay and you're going to be in the preliminary fights and you're not going to get into a big show. So yeah, it's important. You have to take those steps in the right order to have the right balance of wins and losses to go into the bigger leagues.
Okay. And if you end up in a big show and you're not prepared and you lose horribly, I'm assuming that it's pretty hard to erase that.
Yeah, you're not coming back quick after that. They're not looking to invite you back right away and say, hey, you lost 10 fights before you got here. You came here and you got beaten 30 seconds. We probably don't want you back.
Yeah, you're not a great show.
Yeah. So that's not ideal. So it's important to know how to manage your fight career leading up to the big steps.
Yeah. So again, pulling this back to business, in my career, I've accumulated quite a few partnerships and have investors that put their money, invest their money with me to manage it wisely. And I'm thinking about, as you're talking about, if I had every investment, every partnership and every business I was ever in, I lost 10 in a row and then a big one, I wouldn't even feel comfortable asking anybody to invest in me at that point. So again, back to the base hits and manageable risks and all of those things I can see.
So important.
Being crucial.
Yeah.
Talk with me about checkers and chess. I've heard you share that a lot, and I love the analogy.
Yeah, and I talk about it all the time at the gym. And checkers and chess is exactly what it comes down to. When you first start training, you first start fighting and sparring and doing your stuff, you're playing checkers. You're trying to make your moves happen till you get to the end of the game and win. When you get to a higher level of training, now we start playing chess. Now we're no longer just looking to move forward just to get to the end of the checkerboard and get to the end. Our game changes. Now we're looking to play a strategy. Now I'll move a certain way to make you move a certain way so I can do something else. So now I start thinking 2, 3, 4 steps ahead. It becomes a much more involved and in-depth game at that point. Now you start thinking all this strategy, all this, different things. How do I want you to react? Are you reacting to the bait I'm putting out? And can I get you to do what I want you to do so I can employ my strategy? And it becomes super fun when you get two guys who are really good strategists and they're fighting together in the ring. It's amazing to watch because now it's no longer just head-to-head, just going after it. Now it becomes this beautiful ballet of movements. Everybody's thinking like, I'm going to do this. He's thinking I'm going to do that. And you have all these different chess pieces on the board, basically. You know, you're trying to put it all together to make it into a super deep strategy.
And that goes back to experience, right? I mean, I'm sure when you watch a competition, you're able to know here's what they're doing and here's what they're trying to set up because you have so many resources and references for how that's actually played out in the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas somebody who's brand new,
they don't see it. And
they don't see it.
Yeah, that's kind of our job as a coach, right? So as a coach, having that wealth of knowledge, it's great. Like I'll watch fighters as I'm cornering fighters in the ring, and I'll say, all right, move this way. They're going to set up this kick, right? And I could see it coming a mile away. I can see it, but they can't see it yet because they're not experienced yet. So having a good coach is so important because they see that coming. They say, all right, put your left hand up, a high kick's coming. And sure enough, they put the hand up and that kick comes like, wow, that was pretty good. I blocked it, you know? So yeah, it becomes really cool to be able to be the outside to see that for them inside, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And so knowing your opponent would fall right into that as well, right? Sure. And so in business, again, I resist the term opponent because ideally these are people that have a common goal. Right. But knowing who you're communicating with in business and who you're working with and what their background is, it's certainly something I pay a lot of attention to. In a combat sport, it's way more important, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yes.
So the fight that this young lady has coming up, you've researched who her opponent is and what her strengths and weaknesses are as a way of understanding who she's going to be in the ring with and being prepared for that event.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. I don't just look at just that person. I also look at their coach and their strategy for the overall strategy for the team, how they operate. And I try to dissect the whole thing. And this is where the chess game comes in because now I'm not just looking at the one piece in front of me. I'm looking for the king at the end, right? So I have to take out a whole bunch of pieces to get to that end game. And that's how we have to plan it. So we have to look at our opponent, know their strengths and weaknesses, know their camp and their team, and know what generally, most teams have a theme of what they're strong in and what they're weak in.
I see.
Some have difference, and so now we look at the whole picture, and it becomes fun on my end because I love that strategy and that chess game of finding the weaknesses and exploiting them.
Yeah. So when do you take a break? I know this young lady's training real hard. And again, when I'm preparing for some meetings, I'm training real hard. When do you know as a coach who's so used to watching people when they're ready? And is it important for somebody to actually take a little breather before they go into the event so they can clear their mind? I mean, is it counterproductive to just train hardcore up until the day?
It is.
Can you share with us?
Yeah. So normally we'll go hard for about 8 weeks. And the last week before the fight is time to dial it down. So we don't want to risk anything the last week. So everything the last week is always just technical, just movement, cardio, weight management. If we have to make weight, we have to balance weight out, whatever. That's fine. But no hard sparring or nothing hard, nothing new the last week before a fight. We don't want to cram all kinds of weird new stuff in their head the week before they go out. But generally, the 8 weeks leading up to it is pretty hard training, steady through, with 1 or 2 days of break each week. So they'll have train 6 days and take a day off, or train 5 days and maybe 2 days off, not back to back, but maybe 2 different days off. But we have to manage that. But I also have to try to put that together by the fighter. So some people burn out. They burn out fast. And I'll tell them, all right, take this week off or take a day or 2 off. Sit out today or just watch. They're burning out too much. Other people, they've got this fire and this drive and just never quit. And they're like this young lady that's coming up this week. She's got no quit in her whatsoever. So for her, it's just she's going to grind until I tell her to stop. So she'll go until next week. She fights in 2 weeks. So this will be her last hard week of fighting, and then next week will be all technical, weight management, and that's it. And by the following weekend, she'll be ready to fight. Okay, she'll be recharged.
And you're gauging all the time. I mean, her mental state during that. I mean, you're able to see that she's starting to get too overwhelmed, and you're adjusting accordingly.
Always, constantly.
Yeah,
probably several times within a training session, I'll assess. So if she's drilling, or anybody for that matter, if they're drilling, and I see that focus isn't right, their technique is wavering, whatever the case is, I'll say, all right, take a round off, sit out, get your head right, then get back in.
Okay.
So sometimes we have to take a step back and breathe and kind of reassess the situation, then get back into it. And that's important.
Yeah. Well, that's important in business. I know, I don't think I'm unique that I push real hard in business. And that means for me accomplishing a lot, right? I don't have opponents, but I've got people that I'm trying to work with and accomplishments we're trying to get done. And there's definitely a point where not enough sleep, too much stress, I'm not as effective. and I start to backpedal. Matter of fact, I've watched that many times in my life where I pushed beyond where I was still effective. And I didn't have a coach
Right.
helping to gauge that for me, but it is, again, why I like this conversation, because it's so amplified. And these are the things that I'm learning as we're talking about. Just finding that balance is so important.
It really is.
And it's great to have horsepower, right? I mean, it's great to be able to get stuff done and to dig in, but there does become a point where you got to recharge and regroup.
Definitely. Yeah. No doubt.
Yeah. So what we've talked about seizing opportunities, and what do you see as an opportunity in the combat sports that somebody's ready to go after, and you step up and you take it, as opposed to potentially letting one pass, walking away, as an example?
Probably the biggest, the most common is title fights. People dangle title belts in front of fighters' faces all the time, and the promoters do. They do it all the time. They say, all right, well, we've got this guy. He's 15-1. He's an animal. Blah 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 blah. Does your guy who has 3 fights want to fight this guy for a title shot? And of course, the fighter's going to say yes.
Right.
So, yeah, I want that belt. I want to fight it. But that's where it comes through me. And they say, hey, you want this fight? And I look at that guy and I say, well, that guy's got a lot more experience. He's destroyed everybody. This guy's got 2 fights or 3 fights. And it's not. So we have to know when to walk away from that and say, all right, look, that's not the right fight for us at this moment. Not yet. It may be later, but not yet. So seeing the title fight is always like the big picture. Everybody wants that belt. That's what we're all striving for, whether it's professional, amateur, or whatever. Everybody wants to hang that belt on the wall and just know that I made that championship fight. But you have to know when the opportunity is right. So you can't just take it because someone offered it. And that's it's a big thing. It's it happens all the time. Guys get used to stepping stones because promoters will play on their egos and say, I know if I put this belt out there, someone's going to jump on it, and my guy who I want the belt to, he's going to keep it because he's that good,
Yeah.
So we have to know when the opportunity is right. But on the other side of that coin, when my fighter's been ready and training and he's prepared and I know he's 100% there, then that title fight comes up. We say, yeah, we'll take that fight, and then we'll try to do our best to get that title.
And if the opportunity is way beyond where the person is ready for, again, back to this car wash, 3.9 million, somebody who's never owned a business before, that could devastate them for a long time financially, and they might be done. I mean, they may never pursue a business again. And again, if somebody's not prepared for a title fight.
Same. I've seen it happen. Guys who've, seasoned fighters who've had a decent run, they get offered a title shot, something way out of that class. They take it because their ego says, I want to take it. And they get beat, not just beat, they get beat bad. And then they're like, that's it. I'm done. I don't want to fight anymore. And then they'll never fight again. It's like, this is crazy. You've had all these years of training, all this fighting, all this, everything led up to this. You took the opportunity too soon. You weren't ready for it. You took it, but they didn't digest it or process it properly, the loss. They take the loss and they're like, oh, I don't like this, and they're done. It's crazy to see that, but it could end a career.
And a lot of things in life, right?
Yeah.
Too much, too quick sometimes can just be devastating, and it's game over.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when somebody's in a combat event, they're competing, what's the management of emotion and energy, and because it's exhausting?
It is.
Right? So can you share with us how you help people to be prepared to expend that much energy in a very short period of time, and all of the mental dynamics that are going on? How do they stay on track, and what do they do to prepare themselves for that and manage that?
It all starts with cardio. You have to have the right kind of cardio, because you could be a marathon runner and come into an MMA gym and that cardio does not translate. We're not running 40 miles. We're sprinters. We're quick bursts, everything explosive. And I get it all the time. People come in and do all different things, whether it's biking or swimming, and they're like, man, I can't believe 3-minute rounds. I'm exhausted. Yeah, it's a very different cardio. So it all starts with our cardio, getting that fundamental down first. But then after that, we put them in pressure situations. Fighters have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's so important. We put them constantly pressuring them, putting somebody in their back, getting them ground and pounded, and had to fight out. And then as soon as that person gets off, I put a fresh body on them. That guy has to ground and pound. Then you have to keep going until you can't, and get used to being there, because that's where it's going to be in the fight. You can't just like, I'm tired and I think I'm going to take a break. There's no breaks. You don't get a timeout in fighting. He's going to keep hitting you in the face until the ref stops it or he's done. So you have to deal with that being comfortable with being uncomfortable situation. That's so important in fighting.
Yeah. Well, and in business, again, the contrast is really, somebody sitting on top of you and punching at you until you're done, or somebody stops it. I don't know that it gets much more intense than that unless it's a military environment or something where literally just life and death.
Yeah.
But yeah, getting comfortable being that uncomfortable would be a stretch.
It's tough. Yeah. It's a lot to deal with.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's all part of the training. We have to mentally prepare ourselves for that and know that my training's prepared me for this situation and I could weather this storm and find a way out. Mm-hmm. That's what we have to deal with.
So we talked about anger and fear and all of those things in prior episodes, but the anger part, I mean, and you stated that when people get angry, they're not as effective, and some people use that to their advantage. How do you deal with anger? How do you deal with not letting anger take over if you're getting beaten and you're losing? And
yeah, that's a lot to deal with. That's a tough one to digest because when you get punched, you want to get angry.
Yeah.
It's natural human instinct, right? But when we deal with that in a fighting environment, we have to, again, this comes back to that being comfortable with being uncomfortable, knowing that I've been there 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, how many times I've been punched in the face. It didn't kill me. I've been thrown to the ground. I'm still here. I've been caught in submissions. I didn't die. And you have to mentally prepare yourself to say, all right, I've been through all this stuff. I've walked through this storm countless times before. So then you start to kind of get your breathing and you're almost like a moving meditation in place in the midst of all this chaos. So you're in there fighting, you're throwing down, you're getting after it, you're getting hit, you're hitting back, but your mind has to stay clear. So sometimes the best thing is you start to feel anger and rage come on. We have to kind of like stick a jab. As I always say, double jab out, stick a jab and make some space, and then take a deep breath and relax and get your thoughts back together quick. We only have that much time to do that. There's not a lot of time before the next storm comes in. So we have to take a step back, deep breath, and clear your brain fast, and back in we go, and with a clear mind. So self-meditation, like being able to meditate, whether relaxed in a quiet environment at home or on the fly in the middle of a fight, is super important to control that anger because it happens. I mean, you start getting hurt, you start getting mad, but if you get mad, you make mistakes. And when you make mistakes, the other person starts picking you apart and capitalizing it. And that's a terrible way to lose, is because your emotions got the better of you. So deep breaths and controlling, making space, taking a deep breath and controlling your breathing, clearing your mind for a split second, that usually gets the anger down and back to rely on your technique.
Yeah. Well, and again, so much of what you shared applies to business, right? You've got all this stuff coming at you and you need to take a little breather and step back and clear your mind. Fortunately, in business, typically you have way more time to do that, but you still have to get ready to play the game. If you've entered the ring of business, so to speak, you got to show up. And in my career, some of the times that I've been pushed to my limits and grown the most were the times I didn't have a choice. And maybe I didn't have a choice because I was helping somebody buy a business and their earnest money is on the line. And we're trying to deal with some issue with either a lender or the buyer and the seller or a key employee. And it's got to get done. Right. And matter of fact, I've got one of those right now that I'm working on where we've got a whole deal that's on the ropes, using your terminology, because of a landlord. And nobody's fixing this except me. I mean, I've got to step up and get it done with the landlord, hopefully, so everybody can get what they want. And it is one of those, again, nothing even remotely like what you're accustomed to. Nobody's punching me in the face in this situation, but it is me being held to task and having to process all of the things that come along with that. And there are times I don't want to do it. And yet it has to be done because of the commitment I've made to others. And yeah, when you're in a ring, you're committed.
Yeah.
Right?
No other way to put it other than that.
Yeah. So let me ask you about this. You touched on tension. And I know you've shared with me a couple times as you've coached me that I get the tighter I am, the more energy I exert and the less effective I am. So you shared a little bit about being able to relax. So when somebody's competing in a fight, trying to be relaxed while somebody's trying to hurt you, again,
it's not an easy thing to do.
Not an easy thing to do.
And it all comes down to, again, that breathing, that relaxing, that being able to clear your mind on the fly. Like, I'll tell you a quick story. I had a fighter, one of my fighters, we were fighting we were in Japan, and Pancrase organization. Was a great fight, great show. And one of the other fighters who I became friends with, who was a pretty big time fighter, he was in one of the fights earlier in the night. And I was watching his fight go, and this guy was in a bad spot, man. He was in a really bad, he was on the bottom against the cage, and this dude was on top of him, just hammering him, getting after him. And somehow or another, my friend wound up getting his feet against the cage. It's going to be hard to visualize this.
Yeah.
But it's not going to make any sense, but you'll get the gist. So he walks his feet up the cage, turns his body sideways, and pushes off. And there's a photo of him, like, it looks like Superman flying off the cage, tackling this other guy. And it was amazing. He wound up winning the fight. He got on top of me, ground and pounded, and submitted this other guy, all because he was able to keep his mind about him while he was on the bottom. I'm sure he was tense. When he was on the bottom, he was tense. He was tight. He was covered up and shelling and surviving. And but by having that moment of clarity and saying, all right, wait a second, I can relax. And he did. He relaxed. You can see it. He relaxed for a second. He turned his body. He pushed off the cage. And all of a sudden, he was on top of this other guy and submitted him in seconds.
Wow.
It was incredible. But that comes back to that being able to relax in that terrible situation, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's our world. We have to be there,
And managing the emotion along with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you do if you find yourself, you're way over your head? And based on your resume, I know you weren't there very often.
Not too often. Everyone gets there at some point, though.
Yeah.
And that's tough. It really is tough because you have to, and sometimes you're way outclassed. You're just simply outclassed. But that doesn't mean you can't win, right?
Mm.
Just because, and you have to have that mindset of knowing that, all right, I'm outclassed. This guy is bigger. He's faster. He's stronger. And I've been in that situation where I've been the smaller, slower, weaker guy. And that's scary. Just fighting these gorillas and monsters. And I'm like, good Lord, man, what am I dealing with here? And, but you have to have that mindset of saying, all right, well, it's David and Goliath. Just because he's bigger, stronger, or faster doesn't mean he can out-strategy me. And I'll give you another quick story. I fought a guy out back in New York. This is way back in the day. And he was probably about 350. He was a big fella. He looked like a big farm boy, a little bit of belly on him. He was huge. And I was like, maybe 195 at the time. So there was a significant weight. There's probably 150-pound weight difference. That's which is tremendous in fighting.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this guy as I'm standing across from him, and I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to run out. I'm going to front kick this guy in the chest as hard as I can. I'm going to put him on his ass. I'm going to get on top of him. And I had this whole plan in my head, how this is going to go. They said, fight. I run out, and hard as I could, I front kicked this guy. Bang! He didn't even flinch. I bounced off him. I went back about 3 feet. It's like, oh shit! Time for a new strategy. Let's do something else.
Back to Plan B.
Yeah, Plan B, right? So like we talked in the earlier episode, have an A, B, and C. Well, I had to go to A, B, C, D, E, and F. I was running down a line on this thing. But eventually I figured out, it took me quite a few attempts. I went for a sweep on him. He threw me back. He swept me. I was able to get back up. I said, man, this is not going how I thought at all. And then finally I figured, all right, he's bigger, he's stronger, and he's faster, but I could out-strategy him. And so I was outclassed. I was in trouble, but I was able to put it together, and I got my brain going in the right direction. So, all right, well, I could bait him. I could start moving. Now he's building momentum going forward. A freight train, 350 pounds is coming at me. If I just sidestep him, I can get behind him. Oh. And that became my game. And I want to beat him. I want to take him down, ground and pound, and beating him because he commit forward. And even though I was outclassed, I was in the wrong place there. I was able to put my strategy together. And because I believed in myself and had that confidence and the wherewithal to stay about what was happening at the moment and not get overwhelmed, right? Dealing with all these emotions coming in, thinking like, all right, if I get overwhelmed, I'm dead. If I get angry, I'm dead. I get too tense, I'm dead. I got to stay relaxed. I got to stay calm. I got to breathe, and I got to figure it out. And that's exactly how it went. It was so satisfying at the end of this fight to know that, all right, everything was against me, and I was able to put a strategy, play that chess game like we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. He was playing checkers. I was playing chess, and I was able to beat him out because of that, which was awesome.
Yeah, that must have felt amazing.
It was good.
So those voices in your head that so often can take all of us out.
Yeah.
You were able to manage those and stay focused on offense as opposed to defense as much, it sounds. Is that accurate?
Accurate. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's those positive affirmations, and I talk about that in my book. The positive affirmations are so important in a fighter. So important. Just we have to always convince ourselves that nothing could stop us. Nothing can hurt us. Nothing could beat us. No matter how bad the situation is, there's a way out. And there's always a way out. You just have to, see it, stay relaxed, and convince your brain to not give up, right? Uh-huh. One of my coaches always tells me, and I tell this to all the fighters, is when your mind quits and your body gives up, your spirit takes over. Your fighting spirit takes over. And I love that because it's so true, because your mind will go first. In a fight, in combat situation, your mind is the first thing saying, oh man, we're getting hurt. We should quit. Then you kind of push through that a little bit, and your body starts breaking down. Your arms are heavy. You breathe in. You're exhausted. You're like, your body's saying, dude, enough of this. We're done. And then that's where the fighting spirit kicks in. And all of a sudden, that thing says, F that, man. Get up, get in there, and finish this job. We have a job to do. Let's get it done. And there's no quit in it. And it all ties together with keeping these emotions together, those positive affirmations, believing in your technique and yourself and everything else. And it's just super cool when you see it all come together, whether it's on yourself or another fighter. You'll see it in fights all the time. Any level of fighter, you watch them, you could see that spark when it clicks. Somebody's almost done in a fight, and all of a sudden they come back and win it. Like his warrior spirit just kicked in.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That is cool. And I can relate to that a little bit in business times when I felt like I just enough is enough. I just don't want to go on. And then some part of me shows up for another round, and it feels way better that way than the I'm done.
Absolutely.
Part. Yeah. So when somebody loses, and we all lose at something, right? Dealing with that adversity is a big deal. I think for some people, it takes them out, like you alluded to earlier. And for others, it becomes a learning opportunity. And you shared something with me that I really appreciated, which is that undefeated can actually be a curse. So talk with us about adversity. And again, in the amplified world that you train in, adversity is hard, right?
It is. It's very difficult. It's a lot to deal with because, especially the undefeated streaks, that's a lot of pressure. You have to deal with that, and it starts building on you. Every fight you have, you go out and you win again, and you win again. You feel great, but then that pressure starts coming in like, man, I don't want to lose. I had 6 fights in a row that I won. Now I've had 7 fights in a row that I won. Now I've had 8 fights. I can't lose now. If I lose now, everybody's going to lose faith in me. And you start doubting and all this stuff. So you have to build that mental capacity to say, all right, well, how do I deal with this? What if I win 10 in a row and I lose my 11th? What do I, is that going to kill me? Is that going to crumble me? Is that going to stop me? And some people it does. If their mental capacity is not there, they might give up. And I've had fighters in the past do that. I've had guys win everything. They lose one fight and gone, done. Never fight again, which is amazing. I had a fighter back in New Jersey who did that. He won 2 title belts amateur. He went undefeated amateur. He went pro. He won his first pro debut. He fought his second fight. And he got submitted and he quit. I was like, dude, you had all these fights. You've never lost. You're going to let one moment define you? And he's like, I don't like this. And I was like, it's incredible. But other fighters will have that mental toughness to go through that and say, all right, well, what can I do with that? How do I grow from this? I've lost this fight. Now, what do I do to make myself better? How do I not let that happen again? And that becomes the important lesson that you have to take away from it. It becomes more about self-improvement rather than dwelling on the loss. And getting down about it and being upset. You should never be upset about a loss. Nobody wants to lose, of course, but you shouldn't be upset about it. You should study it. Why did it happen? What can we do to fix it? How do we make that never happen again? And that's how we have to approach those kind of situations.
So there's a lot there for me. And again, I keep applying this to business, and I'm assuming our audiences as well, but we all take hits and we have some losses. But what I heard you say was that when you have a loss, to not let it get you down and to learn from it, that's a process, right? And so what's that, when somebody loses an important fight to them, how long are they down? And at what point, and is there a way to speed it up? Because I'd love to know.
Yeah.
At what point do you let that go and focus on what's next as opposed to
that varies person to person. It varies, but generally, as soon as we get back to training, usually after a fighter will take a week off to kind of recuperate the body and the mind and kind of just settle back in because it's an intense thing leading up to it. But usually when they get back to the gym, we'll start immediately working on what went wrong. Whether they lost or won, it doesn't really matter. Even if you win, there's things that go wrong in the fight.
Oh, interesting.
And we take those bits and pieces. All right, well, the fight went great, but this could have been better. We kind of messed up on this piece here. And we fine tune those things. We don't want to hammer it until it's like just, enough, but we touch on it and get it fresh in your head while the wound is still there. And then once they get that digested, then we kind of move on. It's all right, let's move on. And next fight camp, that becomes part of the fight camp as they prepare. But it doesn't have to be hammered in every day for, the duration until the next fight camp.
So there's a point you shift focus.
We just, we have to shift it and let it go.
That's past.
That's it. Put it behind you. What are we looking at next? Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's funny. I had a mentor in business a long, long time ago, and one of the terms he shared was next. Yeah. And it was just like, okay, that's done. Next. Yeah. What's up? What are we after? What are we going to do?
Perfect. Yeah, it's a perfect way to look at it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When does somebody need to tap out? I mean, when, again, that fighting spirit, the exhaustion, I mean, all that comes together. When's the tap? When's the surrender? When's the I give up?
That's always tough. And, that applies to an immediate fight and a career at the same time. And you see it in both, in a fight, when you're actually in the ring, sometimes you have to know it's, I'm taking too much damage. I got to quit. I don't want to, there's no need. If you know you're stuck and you're just in that bad of a spot, you have to just tap, say, all right, I'm done. There's no need to take extra damage. It's just going to make me take that much longer to prepare for my next one. In a career, you see this a lot with the old-time fighters, especially the old-time, like the early UFC days and stuff. These guys were legends, right? There was super legends back in the day, and they'd fight and win and lose, but they were legends. And then they come back in their 40s and 50s, and they're trying to fight again, and then they're losing, and they're getting beat up and losing. And then you're like, oh, man, now they're no longer remembered as a legend because they don't want to let the fighter spirit go. They want to keep it going. And they'll fight way further than they should into their career, and they start losing a whole bunch in a row, and then they get remembered as that old guy who tried to make a comeback and just got beaten to a pulp. So you have to know when it's time to tap out based on where you are in your career and where you are in your life. So for fighters, a lot of times we're 30s into 40s. You're getting old for a fighter. It's getting up there. You have to know, all right, if I'm still winning in my 30s into 40s, it's probably a good time to leave. Now go out on top. You did great. You did fantastic. Now's a good time to leave. You don't want to fight into your 50s and toward your 60s and you be getting your ass kicked for the last 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And people just remember you as that old guy getting beat up, So it's but it's tough because as fighters, we don't want to let go. We want to keep going, but it's kind of a tough deal. But you have to know when to say, I've taken enough damage and it's time to let my body rest.
Time for a new chapter.
Yeah.
And I went back and forth about whether I wanted to ask you about this just because I know when your career ended, you were at the top of your game really. And my guess is you wouldn't have chosen to end your career there, but since we're talking about adversity and when it's time to stop and all of that, can you share that story with us?
Yeah, it was a blessing in disguise for sure. Cause I would have been one of those guys that just kept on going. I was near 40 and I was, fighting all the time, competing in everything from judo to MMA to grappling to weapons to you name whatever I can get into, I'd fight. And I loved it. I just loved all of it. And I had a heart condition and it pulled me out of fighting. And I'll tell you a quick funny story because it's kind of funny. Well, I'm getting ready for the East Coast Judo Championships, which was a big deal. I lived on the East Coast at the time. And East Coast it's a big tournament. And I was preparing for that at the time and knew something was going on with my heart. I wasn't sure what it was. So I went and I was getting looked at and the doctor says, all right, well, go about your regular routine until we figure out what's going on. I said, all right, fair enough. So I went and I signed up for this East Coast Judo Championship and I'm preparing for it. Me and my buddy were training for it. And my wife says, are you going to do that tournament? I go, yeah. She goes, you can't do that. I said, that'll be fine. So she calls the doctor on me. She rats me out. And the doctor calls me into his office. He says, are you planning on doing a judo tournament? I go, yeah. He goes, I said, you said, do your normal routine until we figure it out. It's this competition part of my normal routine. He goes, you can't do that. He says, if you take one fall, it could be your last fall. I said, well, I don't plan on falling, so I don't see what the problem is. He did not find it as funny as I did. And he was pretty adamant about it. He's like, no, you can't do it. And he said, literally, you could die on the mat. That's right, fine. So I didn't do it. And it was bittersweet because my training partner, who I used to beat every day in training, wound up winning the whole thing, which is great because I was really happy he won it. But I was like, deep down, I was like, I could have won it.
Yeah.
But, luckily, though, that forced me to retire from fighting. I couldn't fight anymore after that. That was the end of it, my fight career. But that catapulted me into being a much better coach because now I couldn't focus on myself anymore. And I had all this drive and energy to focus into other people. And it was fantastic because when I was fighting, I'd have to work on me and my fighters at the same time. I'd go back and forth and they had half my attention, which is not fair to the fighters. So now being retired from fighting, it just gave me a full drive to go 100% dive into my fighters and bring the next generation up. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, and I can appreciate, most of the best coaches I've ever met have been there.
Yeah.
And you've been there in every way there possibly was. And so for you to have finished your career when you did and opened that up to the ripple effect of all the people that want to accomplish similar things in your industry, it's passing it on. Right? Yeah,
absolutely. You got to pass the torch to the next generation, and it's been countless champions since that I've been able to be part of their career, which is pretty amazing. So
that's great.
It sounds cliche and all that, but it really is. It's more gratifying to watch somebody else get their hand raised that you helped prepare than it is for yourself.
Wow.
When you win something, you go and you fight, you win, you did it, you're proud of yourself, you're happy. But there's something different when you coach somebody and you prepare that person, especially someone like who comes from never training, and all of a sudden they're in the ring and then you see the hand get raised, like, oh man, it's just like, you get like goosebumps, like, oh, it's amazing. It's such a cool experience to be part of that, you know?
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, that's a perfect tie into my last question for you, which is I'm a big fan of my belief that nobody gets there on their own, right? I mean, success comes with people helping people up along the way. And my guess is you've had a lot of people who have given you a hand up along the way, but if you think of one or two people in your life that really reached down and gave you a hand up and brought you to a whole new level, can you share a story about who that is? Or?
Yeah, well, there's a few actually, but believe it or not, my wife is probably one of the biggest because we've been training together since we started dating. So this is going back 30 years now, over 30 years now. And she's been my training partners when we first started dating, when I started teaching her how to fight and doing stick fighting and grappling, all this crazy stuff. And so she's always been the biggest proponent to kind of push me into success and all this stuff. You know, whenever I was out in a fight, she usually cheered for me, sometimes cheer for the other guy. There was one fight in particular, she was cheering for the other guy because I was beating him up pretty bad. She's like, come on, get up, you can do it. She'll tell you that story, it's pretty funny. But most of the time she cheered for me, but she was always one of the biggest to kind of help me keep on track and kind of push. And then outside of her, I've had a bunch of really good coaches over the years, but one of my biggest, Eric Paulson, he's one of my coaches. He lives out in California. He was just a mentor for me going through this whole phase of my life of transferring from fighter to coach because he's done the same thing. He was the first American to win a title in Japan, and he was a pioneer of MMA back before MMA was even cool. And so he's been through this walk before, and he's got one of the biggest MMA gyms out in California, and he's got top fighters that fight in the UFC. And so he's been a really big asset for me to be able to, he's my big brother, man, you know.
Is he?
I'll call him up, say, hey, Eric, I got this deal with, what do you think? And he'll give me his insight on it and whatever else. And it's important to have a good support network, you know. So between my wife pushing from her side and him with the past similar to mine, it's gone really well. We had a lot of good influence over the years.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and the honor and respect piece, you've shared that a lot with me about the honor of being a martial artist. Where did you learn that? Who taught you that?
That comes from, believe it or not, more of my traditional side of martial arts. So a lot of the MMA stuff, especially the newer guys these days, they come from this I want to fight era, and they don't really care about anything else. They're just fighters. I want to fight. I want to fight. I want to fight. There's no respect. There's no honor. There's no discipline. There's just a drive to fight, which is fine in its own thing. But I always tell our fighters, you should be a martial artist first and a fighter second. You know, that meaning you need the respect, the discipline, the courtesy, the honor, everything that goes with fighting. And that comes from a lot of years of doing samurai swordsmanship and kendo and iaido and all these traditional martial arts over the years, because it's so hammered into the culture that it becomes just part of it's second nature, really. You know, so I don't think of things as, I'm going to go in and kill that guy. I mean, that's in my head. I want to fight and I want to win. But I go in thinking more of a samurai going into battle of how do I win this honorably and how do I win this the best possible way? You know, how do I approach this with respect and courtesy and discipline and not just look like a wild animal out just swinging for the fences, you know?
Wow, that's great. Yeah. And I'm glad I asked you the question for lots of reasons, but because I know Sandra, I think it kind of summarizes this whole series we've done together, which is I would think most people wouldn't think that the woman in your life was the one that helped you become, as I said, the nicest and most dangerous person I know.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I love that.
Yeah.
And I love the team
amazing
that you two are. And that's
Thank you.
So wonderful.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for being here. It's just been such an honor to try to learn more about who you are and what you do and why you do it and apply that to business.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Thank you. So for our audience, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have, and I hope that you can pull all of the gems that are in this conversation out for your benefit and use this to further your success in all of the areas that you want to achieve greatness. And that's a wrap on today's episode. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and got some valuable insights into the world of buying and selling businesses. Want to be a guest on our show? If you have a deal that you'd like to discuss with us or a business story to share, we'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email using the contact information below in the episode notes, and let's make this happen. Never miss an episode. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And if you found today's episode helpful, please leave us a review. It helps more people like you find the show.